So actually, the thing is, normally when you start writing a book, you decide to write the book, and then it's about a subject that you are attached to, I suppose, and then you dig more into it. But in my case, what happened was really from 2004, I have been reading Dr. Ambedkar's writings and speeches and everything written about him, and the sources of his thought and all that. And this was I was doing for years together, with no intention of writing a book. So, I was just doing studies on my own for about 10 years. In fact, in that period, I am fond of reading, but in that period, I did not read any fiction at all. I started reading fiction some days back, the first novel in some many years. So, so that I was so, you could say, obsessed. I don't know what to say, but anyway, it was very captivating, and I had not really thought it. Never came to my mind that I should write a book about it. But it came up in a conversation with some friends, and they said, what are you reading? The usual thing, what are you reading? Those kind of friends. And then I said, this is what I'm doing. And they said, what the hell, you should write about this, because, I mean, they're also pretty well read. And they said, what you're talking about it's not common knowledge. So that I thought about that, and I thought, yes, I mean, after all, I have, mostly, of course, the Marathi sources and all that I have read. But that apart, I thought, connecting Dr. Ambedkar's ideas, I could. I mean, many people have written about his ideas, but I didn't see the kind of connections made explicitly, like which I could see. In the sense, there is a continuity in his thought, although his positions on different matters changed often, but there's a continuity in his thought. There are certain principles, certain values he upholds right from the time he enters public life, 1919 or so, till his last days. So, uh, and so that was the kind of stringing of a story I said that needs to be told. So that's how I thought of writing the book. And fortunately, I mean, this is just one of those chance things. I was already in touch with Anand, the publisher, and so I had not met him. I met him really actually only which about the time the book was to be published, a little before that. But so in his I don't know, in his courage or his madness, he said, "Yeah, let's do it." Because I say courage or madness because after all, I was not a published writer on Ambedkar, and it's a topic you don't sort of you can have anybody writing books on, let's say, cooking or something else, but when you're writing on Ambedkar, you better be sure who's writing it. And so, but through the conversations I had with him, I don't know, he had some kind of confidence that I could do it. So, and that's how I started writing the book. The book itself went through two major versions. The first version which I wrote was, I wanted to just tell the story of the evolution of Ambedkar's thought. So it was the first version was basically only about Dr. Ambedkar's ideas, and very little about his life. That version was actually half the size of the current version. But then when Anand and his associate Alex read it, they said, look, I mean, we need biographical details also. You cannot assume that the reader knows uh, all the facts about Ambedkar's life. And also, since I was reading Marathi, and there are a lot of sources in Marathi, especially a multi-volume biography of Ambedkar in Marathi, which has limitations, but still there's a lot of information there. And he says, who's going to read that? How many people have access to that Marathi biography and other Marathi sources? A lot of sources. So you have to provide biographical detail. So I saw the argument. I mean, after all, you do these kind of things only once in your life, so might as well do it well. And so I went back to the drawing board, so to speak, and actually restructured the whole book, and started. You can say almost I started writing afresh. Means there were some portions I just could take, but otherwise, the first sentence itself was different. So that's how I started writing. So it took all in all, it took about 4 years of writing, and and then after the manuscript was ready, then it went to reviewers. I mean, as it normally does. But I would say in my case, it was a very useful and important stage, because it went to reviewers who have read Ambedkar, and some of them have read in Marathi also. So although the review process took time, I mean, after all, you can't sit on people's head and say, "Look, read it and tell me in 10 days." It took time, but finally, what came back to me was very useful. So I have acknowledged the reviewers also. I mean, I know this is a normal process in book publishing, but I would say in my case it was definitely very useful uh, in both senses. One is that they pointed out certain missing connections, and they pointed out some howlers, some factual howlers, and also for me it was like, because I'm making connections and I'm making statements, and which in my reading have not been made before, and they had no objection to that. I mean, they could see my argument, so which means that my argument was making sense. And that was very important. After all, I could be just deluding myself. So these people's reading was very important to me, and that's how finally then the book came to its current shape. So yes, so it was not really a start writing a book and you got a book out. It went through many things, and I was okay with all the changes and all that, because anyway, I'm right. This was like, I'm writing it for an objective of, it's like an educative purpose. So therefore, and I've been working in the field of education for many years. So the objective matters, your own thing of being a writer, so to speak, is not so important. So that's how it came out. I mean, now that I think of it, I don't know how I really did it because it's a hell of a lot of, it's about 800 pages and so many references and this and that. And by and large, I think, I mean, right till the end, I never felt it to be very stressful or whatever. I enjoyed it completely, except the last thing, which many people had warned me, that the indexing. Yeah, indexing can kill you. Indexing can kill you, and it has to be done by somebody else. But I mean, we don't have those kind of funds or those kind of professionals. So indexing, really, I did only half of it, but A to K plus L to Z, that kind of the work was divided that way. But honestly, till when I finished my half of it on the last day, if it had gone for one more day, that work, I think I would be not in this world. It was damn bloody tiring, that indexing, but the rest of it was really enjoyable. And in a way, writing also is a way of, when you're writing, you're again rereading Ambedkar, right? Which I'm doing again now, because the book is getting translated into Marathi, and the translator had so many queries, and so in that process, I'm reading Ambedkar again. So yeah, that is how it has been. So now there has, like I said, Ambedkar was a very active man. He wrote a lot, he spoke a lot, he read a lot, and always in response to certain situations. There are very few texts that he wrote for academic purposes, so to speak. It was always in response to some situation, and he was a intellectual using ideas for a social and political purpose. That is so. So he has written about on a vast number of topics, and almost everywhere you see that although he takes ideas from others, he does takes ideas from others, he understands them in his own way, and finally what he presents is his own work. So now, if you just try to put all the ideas that he spoke about, it's a lot, and and this has been done, but it's useful, of course, that kind of compilation, but it doesn't give you a connecting thread. It becomes quite confusing, because one thing is that Ambedkar was not a, let us say, he was not, you could say, a person like Marx who had a grand theory and worked on that for a large part of his life. So, and I think Ambedkar was a little skeptical about grand theories anyway. So, so you have, so that's one disadvantage, so to speak, when you're approaching his large body of thought. Also, he didn't write autobiography or diary. He didn't maintain diaries, as far as we know, and he didn't have the kind of colleagues that other leaders had in that time, who were colleagues or associates who were taking down everything that he said, maintaining it properly and all that. So his writings and all that is all scattered, and so making sense of it is a challenge. So I would say and I try to understand what is this, what is he most concerned about, which he follows all the way through his life. And I argue, so not maybe in so many, I put it forward in this book, that it was this notion of social democracy, that democracy as a democratic form of society, a democracy as a way of life, which he said is far more important than political democracy. And in fact, he said that political democracy would not last if social democracy is not established. That, it turns out, is not political democracy in some form or the other is going on, though social democracy, we are far from it. But in any case, so this concern for social democracy, and finally you have to go to why did he finally turn to the Buddha? That was the culmination of his thought. And unless you connect it to his previous thought, you don't understand. It doesn't make sense. I mean, he was not a opportunist. So, and there was no political benefit from turning to Buddhism. In fact, there was political loss. After all, you are antagonizing the majority community. So, in fact, my search started with this, that people have not explained his turn to Buddhism very satisfactorily. So, social democracy is, I would say, is the connecting thread, and related to it are many ideas. Like Ambedkar explains the idea of fraternity in different ways in different times, and finally comes in the Buddha and his Dhamma, his last book, he comes to the notion of Maitri, which is far more than fraternity, and so, but these ideas are there, and in Marathi also uses different terms. But yeah, the basic sentiment is the same, that fraternity, as if we want to use a term from the Constitution of India, fraternity is the core. If fraternity is not there, then I mean, there is no meaningful democracy, social democracy at any rate. So taking that idea, I developed. I pursued his thought. So that also means leaving out some aspects of his thought, which are interesting, but which don't fit into this big picture, because there are, for example, as the Minister of Labor in the just before independence, he was also in charge of the water resources department and electricity department. So he had ideas on that, on multi-purpose development of rivers and all that. There are speeches on that, but people have written on that separately. But that didn't fit into my big picture. And anyway, there are limits to a book that you have to keep in size. And after all, it's 800 pages itself is a hell of a lot. If 1400 would have been too much. And we certainly didn't want to make it a book in 2 volumes. That we were clear. Because, at least the market says that doesn't work. 2 volumes, you make it as 1 volume. So there were limits for that. So that was about as far as following his thought. Now, as far as the sources are concerned, I mentioned this before also. See, I didn't really discover anything that is not already there. All this stuff is already there in the public domain somewhere or the other. Maybe not in a very accessible form. I mean, all the writings in English are there, published by the government of Maharashtra. And there are other speeches are there, constitution assembly speeches, Rajya Sabha speeches. All these are there, and his Marathi writings are also available in the public domain. You know, his letters, etc. Some writings are gone. We probably will never get them. They have disappeared. So these were there, but people had not. There are certain writings people had not used. Like there are a series of letters he wrote for his periodical Janta from London during the roundtable conferences and his conflicts with Gandhi, which give a very insider's view of what actually happened, the conflict with Gandhi. But somehow those letters have, I mean, a few writers have used it. For example, Gail Ambedkar refers to some of the letters, but her biography, pocket biography of Ambedkar was small book, so she couldn't obviously quote them extensively, these letters. And but there are many other writers on Ambedkar who have not, who are writing in English, who are probably not even aware that there was these letters, which were they were letters to the reader, so to speak, and they were published in Janta on the front page, and it would go into inside pages also. So this is one example. Then there are you hunt the files of the Bombay Chronicle, which is available again in the public domain. You see there are articles he has written there, a few articles. There are letters to the editor he writes. So there are all these sources which were there, in the sense, it was not that there was something. Okay, there are a few things, like, for example, I found an article in Bombay Chronicle written by him, which I don't think anybody else had noticed before, and even I came to it by chance. So similarly, there are some other things, like, there are in the Mountbatten papers, there is a reference to Mountbatten being very happy about Ambedkar being selected by Nehru in his cabinet. There are these bits and pieces which I found, which maybe some others had not found before. But I will not say that finding new stuff is what is the USP of this book. No, I'm working using material that was already found by people before, particularly Ambedkar archivists, Dalit archivists working in Maharashtra for years, from from the 20s, in fact, because his first biographer, Khair Mode, started talking to Ambedkar with a view to write a biography in the 1920s. And Ambedkar was not even a well-known person. So all this material and the recollections of his associates in Marathi, all this was there, but it was like a not in all in one place. I got it all in one place. I was lucky that there is a library in Pune which has a lot of Dalit Ambedkar literature in Marathi, a fantastic collection. So, and then I went to Nagpur, and I got these Marathi uh, publications from different sources. So, but they are not like, it's not like as I said, it's not there is some absolute piece of staggering evidence which I unearthed like some archaeologist. No, it's a matter of, and anyway, I am not a archivist. So my was how to make sense. There's one thing about digging up facts, but the other thing is also about making sense of it, right? And these are, sometimes they could overlap, but I think mostly the historian or the journalist deals with the second part. He's, making sense of all this, putting it together, making sense of it. So that is the job I did. So although there is a hell of a lot of information in the book, which I really put, in the sense, I thought that it was also like, okay, now that you're doing it, might as well put everything there, so that and with all the references, so that future researchers can use this. It becomes like a solid source. you know so although normally one gives references only when you're citing, when you're citing, or when the claim is questionable, then you give a reference, but otherwise you don't give a reference. But I have given, even for the non-controversial claims, I have given a reference just to say that, okay, this is where you can get this more on this. So, keeping in mind other research people who want to study Ambedkar, and I believe that that was good. I mean, I think that is good because quite a few people have told me that they have not read the book, but they have found the references very useful. so so that is how. Yeah, so as I said, and the Marathi text, I am not the first person to use the Marathi text. Gail Omvet and others have used it before, but in a, let's say, a comprehensive manner, in a larger, because this was a large book, and also making the connections between, contextualizing the ideas, what he said, when, why, how it related to what he said on the same subject later, what changed, all that, which I really kept track of it very minutely in my own way, in my own handwriting, which only I can understand, in my notes, and that is how I built this whole picture. So yeah, to answer your question, I make no claim to stunning new archival discovery. And in fact, there are aspects of Ambedkar's life that remain, that about which we remain, about which we continue to know very little. And the archival work, this work is, as we speak, must be going on somewhere. And there are quite a important phases of his life where we actually know very little, and so people are digging up whatever they can get hold of, and who knows, in a few years we'll get some substantially more information about his life, about his writings and speeches. I don't think there is. I mean, we know about texts that he did not complete, and we know about texts that are just gone. They're just gone, and it's gone is gone. So I am not I'm not sure that, about, in terms of his writings, we'll get something that is very important, that will make us rethink everything about his thought. I think about the writings and speeches we have, just about everything we can get. But about his life, definitely there are large gaps. There are large, basic things we don't know. Basic things we don't know. For example, we don't know the date he got married. We don't know that. We don't know the date on which his first, not his first child we know, but the other children, when they were born. We don't know. We don't know many things. I mean, I can make a whole list of these things about which we don't know. And a few of those things I have shared with other people, saying that, maybe you can hunt up these things, in the in if in the position they are, they would be able to do that, geographically, or the jobs that they have, they can have access to certain things. So yes, so Dr. Ambedkar's life still requires a lot of work, and maybe at the end of it, some parts will still remain, unknown. Some parts will remain unknown because all the people who were with him, they're all gone. And during his time, nobody cared to maintain careful records, right? And so, yeah, I mean, we have to live with that. I don't know. So you have to start with some level. So the level I thought was something like, 12th standard pass, done history, knows Pune Pact, knows aware of the major players in pre-independent India, major political parties, those kind of assumptions you would sort of take. You don't sort of say that when the Communist Party was formed and how the Hindu Mahasabha came into the existence and all that. You assume certain knowledge. but so that was that. And interest in Ambedkar, because this is going to be a large book, so you have to be interested to come to the end. And I definitely, and I also thought it would be, while not aiming for a scholar academic audience, it should meet their needs also. It should meet their needs in terms of, proper referencing, and, and ideas are dealt with, the kind of depth that is there in the idea, or in certain other complexities of situations, are all brought out. The only thing to do, which I scrupulously did, was, avoid the jargon. Avoid the jargon. Which anyway, I mean, it was not difficult for me, because anyway I hate that kind of writing, so it doesn't come to me naturally. So I avoided jargon, but of course, in certain terms are unavoidable. I realized that actually during this process of Marathi translation, where you have a real problem of getting equivalent terms, like pragmatism, the school of philosophy called pragmatism. We have to use that word in English because that's the best word available, but it's not very, that Marathi word is not exactly well known, or in fact, maybe not even very, it doesn't capture the meaning entirely. So so there are these some terms, but other than that, so interested person, a person interested in Dr. Ambedkar, definitely, and some fair knowledge of modern Indian history. You don't have to know about much about ancient Indian history, but at least modern industry, freedom movement, and, the main players, British nature of British colonial rule, and all that. Some assumptions like that, I just take it for granted, And in a few cases, of course, as suggested by the Anand, edit, Alex, and all that, some additional information was added, because especially there are certain things in Maharashtra which are well known. People who are from Maharashtra, but from outside Maharashtra, people would not know. So, even including places like where this place is, where is Mahad, how far from Bombay, things like that. So, some information like that was added. So, but yeah, so otherwise, it's basically a interested general reader. I would. And I thought that there is such a reader, frankly, because I first time Ram Guha's Big Tom on Gandhi came out, and I bought it. The thing that came struck me was, who's going to buy such a big book yet? I remember going to the bookstore, and and to my surprise, I thought there were quite a few people glancing through the book. So we have to be very grateful to him for creating this market. Or, I don't know whether this such a market existed before that book, because history books were read by history graduates, undergraduates. History books were history textbooks, so to speak. At least Indian history books. People read a lot about Second World War and all that with great interest, but at least for in modern Indian history, I don't think there was. I don't know. At least I think this was books, huge books, uh, showed that there is a market, and history could be written, uh, and you could write so much in so much detail, and you could still hope to have the reader till the end. so at least for me, that was like a confidence that, yeah, there is. It's not that, I mean, somebody is going to read this book. I was pretty sure. I think, or let's say, putting a question in a different way, that, what can we take from Baba Sahib Ambedkar? So there are many, many. I'll just identify the buckets, but not go into the details. So the one bucket, which is not much covered in this book, is that his very iconic status. I mean, he's a symbol of so many things, right? And so just that iconic presence itself is very important. In what I mean, okay, sometimes it goes into things like, over large statues, and maybe too much of hero worship and all that. But nevertheless, keeping that iconic status alive is very important. Yeah. After all, we do need heroes, and we do need people who inspire us. So that is number one. Okay. And of course, there is a danger there because it will go into hero worship and uncritical acceptance of everything that he said, which he didn't want, right? And it would also go into something like just tokenism, kind of, just taking his name, but without having actually read anything or understanding his thought. It can go into those things also. So that's number one. Second is that his this basic idea of a concern for social democracy, it remains valid, although it seems like a very, very distant and maybe impossible ideal today. Actually, even in Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar's time in America, uh, realistic political theory had come around to this conclusion that you can't democracy, the political apparatus of democracy cannot carry any. It doesn't have. It cannot be burdened, so to speak, with a moral purpose. You know, it is a sort of a stock market in a way. And negotiation ground. It is a ground for negotiations, and and certain parties have advantages over the others. So, and that can change. And then that's the kind of view of democracy. But so I mean, that basically the idea that social democracy is just too distant ideal to even think of realistically. But I think in education and in general, in terms of our day-to-day lives and all that, even if that kind of a society is beyond our reach, it can still those values and principles can still be used in our interactions in different fields, and certainly it's something that is can be taught. It can be taught, the skills and the capabilities required for that, because it has to be learned. So I mean, finally it comes down to living with others, debate, and using debate and discussion and not violence to settle our disagreements and come to some common goals if possible. So, and those are teachable, and those are not those are not natural skills. Those have to be learned, and that can be taught. And so that is an important thing. About on the political democracy itself, there is a lot that he said. He had concerns about it, and we are seeing that. He was very much worried that the constitutional framework would just. I mean, he made it clear that this is just a structure, and constitutional morality. That is that the niyat of the people who occupy this building can change the shape of the building completely. I mean, and then there's no point blaming the constitution. The constitution is like an RCC frame, that. So constitutional morality, he mentioned that word, I think only once, but it's a very important concept. Uh, uh, so that is one idea in terms of political democracy. Exploring this idea of constitutional morality and seeing that how and examining how it is abused, how it is being abused. And that abuse started according to Dr. Ambedkar, it started in his time itself. In his time itself, when fundamental rights were routinely being violated by the state. The irony is that Dr. Ambedkar himself allowed for that kind of states limitations on fundamental rights. He was party to that, because in that particular situation, just after partition and all that, there was a sense feeling that the state would require extraordinary powers at times, but that extraordinary power has been consistently abused. So that is about political democracy. And in political democracy, of course, all the his in his it is it continues to be cited in many academic reports, and even in court judgments, what he said in the Constituent Assembly debates. Because if you want to understand the Constitution of India, Dr. Ambedkar is the best guide, because he explained each and every provision that was accepted, except the very minor ones. He has an explanation on that. So for people from who are interested in constitutional law and all that, Dr. Ambedkar is not the only source, but he's definitely more a very important source to understand constitutions, our constitution at least. And then there are the importance he gave to caste. They highlight his persistent highlighting that, because even in his time, caste was treated as something like, something in the background. It's not so important. It's going away. What we heard today was talked about even at that time. Now, that foregrounding of caste and its effects, that remains a vital topic. Although we may say that his theories on the origin of caste and how his theories on how caste survives and thrives in different conditions, his theories on that maybe we can say today are not so. They don't seem to hold. I mean, caste is far more complex. It is not a tree with one root. It's multiple roots, and it takes sustenance from various places. So, but anyway, the complexity of caste and how it works, that remains a very vital topic in India. And, and Dr. Ambedkar's work is like, resisting the silence on this. And that has to be continued. That is to be continued. So these, and then apart from all this, I think for certain people at least, his way of thinking and his way of making arguments is also very instructive. The way he takes ideas from others and forms his own ideas. I mean, you may not be interested in those ideas. You may not be interested in those ideas, but the process itself is, very, very educative. So that process and his way of arguments, the way he presents arguments. So, so there are, like I said, so there is so much. So there's an inspirational figure. There is a political thinker on political, at least on constitutional aspect. On some other aspects of political democracy in India, which were emerging in his time, he didn't have. He made a few stray comments, but he didn't have much to say, which are very a matter of great concern in today. Like, for example, the role of money power. The role in his time, there were not so many criminals in politics. But anyway, but all that was not. So there, we may not get much from him on those topics, but on the constitution, on constitutional morality, and on the structures, on the constitutional structures and their meaning. We can learn a lot from him. And yes, I must mention also caste, of course, the importance of caste. And I must also mention that although it came to nothing much, that he had his blueprint for a political party, which he charted just before he passed away. That party came into existence, but not in the way he wanted it, and that has now gone split into so many different factions. It doesn't really make sense. But that idea is still very promising. That blueprint itself is very promising. That blueprint is promising, and for may not be for all readers, but how he interpreted Buddhism, which is what I am now deeply studying now, and I hope to write about it. That is also extremely fascinating, and of course, it has this premise which which many people would have difficulty accepting. That is that I mean, the difficulty would why give so much importance to religion, given all that it has done in our country. Why is it not better to keep it? Why not have a Why not speak about those values and principles which are dear to him in the framework of secular thought? So that is a valid valid point. But nevertheless, even if we don't sort of become Buddhists or accept Buddhism, there is a lot in his interpretation of Buddhism, which I have covered only, I wouldn't say cursorily, but still not very in great depth in my book. But I hope to do it now. So there is a lot from because his understanding of Buddhism is extremely daring and novel and original. It is, and for that reason, it's not accepted by the Buddhist orthodoxy across the world. But irrespective of that, what he does is really astounding. Of course. So I mean, there are so many. I don't know whether this is a satisfactory answer, because, as I said, this is not a subject that can be dealt with in a very, because each of these things need to be unpeeled, and on some I am not really very qualified to speak on. Like I said about the iconic status of Ambedkar, what it means and all that. It's not something I've studied. I have experienced it. I mean, I have seen that how people relate to him, how much meaning they get from his life, but it's not something I have studied properly and all that, so I can't. So there are, of the many things that I've talked about, I won't say that I have studied all of them, but these are just some ideas that could be taken up by other people to study in greater depth, and then maybe offer that this is how one can learn from Dr. Ambedkar.